Well, today I'm really delighted to have with us a very, very special guest. We have with us today Archbishop John Vlazny. He is the Archbishop of Portland and has been since 1997. And he's with us today to talk about all of the obviously significant changes going on in the Catholic Church. Archbishop Vlazny, thank you so much for your time. And obviously the big question today is, were you surprised to hear about the Pope's resignation?
Well, yes, I certainly was surprised. I hadn't been expecting it. But on the other hand, as I have told people in the past, this is the Pope I thought that if he ever felt he would be unable to do the job the way he felt it should be done, he would submit his resignation, and that's exactly what he did.
So what do you think this means to the Catholic Church? We haven't seen this in over 600 years, and now the Church is faced with a former Pope. So how do they handle this?
Well, I think he's making it very easy for us to handle everything he said. It indicates he plans to live a very secluded life, not to get in the way of his successor. And I suspect we won't hear from him again until probably the Lord calls him home and we find out some of the things he's been writing and thinking. But he's the kind of man who doesn't look for the spotlight. He clearly wasn't looking to be Pope, but when he did have to step in the spotlight, he did a great job in my judgment. So I think he'll just let the new Pope take charge, and we won't be hearing from him again, except probably for those who might be his friends or family who might see him. So, I mean, obviously, it's one of those situations we just don't know about. 600 years ago, that was the last time it happened. So, but we'll see. The Holy Spirit still really runs the whole show for us anyway.
He has been quite the writer and quite the theologian. I've enjoyed his writings and some of his books. Now, if he continues to go down that avenue of service to the Church, is it a possibility we're going to see any of this, or is it going to be held until he's gone?
Well, there was just a statement I read in the paper, whether it's true or not, that if he does write, that he's not going to publish it until after he dies, which is interesting. I don't think he has to be that discreet, but maybe he feels he doesn't want in any way to say something or write something that could possibly be interpreted as questioning anything his successor might say or do. So he's a very careful, thoughtful man, so I don't see a problem. But I actually would hope we would get to see what he writes. I like that little book he just came out with at Christmas about the infancy narratives. You know, it was a beautiful little book, and he just has some precious thoughts that I think uplift many people spiritually.
I don't know how others are viewing it, but I view this as really an act of incredible humility, being the head of the Church and then stepping down from it because he knows he can't properly fulfill the role. How do you see that?
Well, I would agree with you. It's just a man who recognizes that, you know, not a single one of us is so essential that he can't be replaced, you know, and I feel that in that sense, he's humble, but it's also a sign of his love of the Church, that he just feels the Church deserves better care and attention than he is able to give at this present time. And, you know, the job is so different from what it was 50 years ago. Mm-hmm. The demands on the Pope in terms of travel, publicity, communications, people themselves going to Rome so much more. Everybody wants to see the Pope. So I have to say, it's a job that I think merits the kind of decision he made, and I respect him for it.
What do you think he'll be known for his 8 years of service?
Well, I think maybe we'll have to step back a little bit more to see the whole picture. But one thing for sure, you know, Joseph Ratzinger wrote an awful lot. He had many theological books, lots of spiritual reflections. When Joseph Ratzinger became Pope Benedict XVI, all the writings of Joseph Ratzinger suddenly became something people were interested in. And in many ways, I think it's going to be his spiritual teachings, which are going to be there for people to review, to treasure, and to be inspired by, that are going to be his lasting legacy. Myself, I have to confess, before he became Pope, I hadn't read too much that Joseph Ratzinger had written. I've read lots of it since, and I think that's the great gift. He's been a real teacher of the faith and a real spiritual father to all of us, and I think that's how he'll be best remembered.
How do you think he has influenced the court of the cardinals? In other words, I know that he's replaced quite a few. He's had a great deal of influence in how it is shaped today. What do you think it looks like as they go into the conclave?
Well, you know, I have to tell you this. I don't know many of the cardinals personally. I know the Americans. The Americans who are cardinals are fine bishops and priests. I think they were the right men to be named cardinals. I think if you had polled the bishops' conference, we would have all said, yeah, these are good men. So if that's how it is in the other countries, I'd say they probably have representative clergy in the College of Cardinals who are going to choose the new pope. I have confidence in the Americans whom I know. I only know a couple others. You know, you go to Rome and you meet some of them, but I don't know them as I know the Americans. And like Cardinal Dolan, who's our president of the Bishops' Conference, he's a great priest, a great teacher, a loyal churchman, and a very pastoral man. And that's how most of them are. So I think they're a pretty good group of guys that he's picked.
Do you think Dolan is a possibility? I mean, I've heard him, and again, this is just hearsay because all of the reports that are coming out, but he may be kind of in the top running.
Well, that's what the newspaper, you know, he's the one on whom the spotlight falls among the American cardinals, so that's understandable. When we Americans would think of a candidate, we think of someone from our own country, and yeah, he's probably the one that stands out right now. He's in New York, he's the president of our conference, he's great with the media, so, you know, he's the one on whom the spotlight falls. And he's, in my own judgment, he's a great priest. I knew him before he was even a bishop. I didn't know him personally, but I had to deal with him in some issues, and he was very cordial, very easy to deal with, and that's how he remains today. And if you notice, when he was named a cardinal, the Holy Father asked him to speak to all the other cardinals on the day before their presentation of the red hats, you know, and so he's well known, well liked, well respected, so I could understand why someone would think of him, but I don't know whether or not that's how the cardinals will think. Well, people kind of wonder whether an American will ever get chosen.
Well, that was my next question. Do you think an American ever would be chosen? Because I know that the College of Cardinals now is pretty much shaped by Europeans, and so I was just kind of curious if he would even have a chance.
Well, I have to tell you, 40 years ago, I just presumed that the Pope would always be Italian. Yeah. Well, that all changed in 1978, so anything could happen because they're all eligible. And it's obviously going to be someone that the other cardinals know and have some confidence in. So it's not going to be some cardinal who's laid low and not been exposed too much, not had much to say. So that's why I think the name Dolan comes up, because he's in the press, he has to say a lot of things, New York, Bishops' Conference. So there are other good Americans too, but and I'm sure there are other good men in South America and Africa. And then, of course, it's traditionally an Italian who becomes Pope, but that has just ended in the last few decades. So it could be an Italian again. And there are some good Italians too, I think. The one in Milan, I hear them talk about, and I've read some of the things he's written. He's a pretty impressive guy, Cardinal Scola. So he probably would be given consideration.
Yeah. Before I take a break, let me ask you this, back to Pope Benedict. When he dies, will he be buried in Vatican City?
I would presume so. He is, he was one of the popes, and that tends to be like myself. When I will be retired as the Archbishop of Portland, I would be buried in the last diocese where I served. So I think he would be buried in the last diocese where he served. He served in Rome as the Bishop of Rome. He was the Archbishop of Munich before that. I don't see us going back there for burial. I presume it'll be at St. Peter's. He probably already has specified where he'd like to be buried, but I just don't know that.
Okay.
There's a special, most of the more recent popes have been buried in St. Peter's Basilica.
Speaking of which, now you are retiring. You turned 75 last year, and that's mandatory retirement, so you'll be stepping...
Mandatory writing your letter of resignation. It took them a year to get a successor, but they finally have found somebody willing to take my job.
Okay.
So, yeah, April 2nd, the new Archbishop will be taking over.
Have you met Pope Benedict?
Oh, several times, yeah, because he was a prefect of one of those congregations in Rome, and we bishops every 5 years have to go over and meet with the heads of these various congregations. And so I met with him then, and then I've met him 4 or 5 times since he's been the Pope.
Oh, how wonderful. Well, it is quite a shock. I think the world is still kind of getting their head around it, but now we're finding out that it certainly is health reasons, and he just doesn't have the energy. And as you said, the job now requires incredible travel and an incredible demand upon your time and your physical well-being. So he'll be stepping aside, and we haven't seen this in 600 years, and the College of Cardinals will be going in and selecting another pope. Now, it's hoped that you'll have a new pope for Easter services. You think that's the case?
Oh, I'm pretty sure that they'd like to do that, because if the conclave begins in mid-March, hopefully it wouldn't take more than 2 or 3 days, and then usually a week later they have the installation. So Holy Week begins March 24th, so I'm sure the Cardinals will be looking at that, but, on the other hand, they're not going to be rushed into decision if there's, a little uncertainty as they go into the conclave. But now they all have time to think about it, and by the time they assemble in Rome, right now I'm sure they're surprised. They probably haven't been thinking about it. Whereas with John Paul II, his declining health, people knew that soon there'd be a conclave. This time it is something they probably weren't expecting.
Well, what's so interesting about this, the timing of it, because it's just before the starting of Lent, and it will conclude just before Easter. So do you think that was any significance or just something?
I have a gut feeling it probably was. This Pope would think about things like that. You know, he's going to make the retreat next week with the members of the Curia in Rome. That'll be his last full week as Pope. I could see him wanting to go out with a week of prayer. And then this Lenten season, a time that we as a church step back and reflect and pray, good time to pray with the Holy Spirit for the guidance of the cardinals in selecting a bishop, and then celebration at Easter. It's a beautiful timetable. Because apparently he's been thinking about this for a while, so he had a chance to decide when he wanted to do it. Mm-hmm. And it was kind of a neat moment, I thought, for him to say, hey, you know, Lent is coming, I'm stepping down, let's use this as a time to pray and come together around a new Holy Father. So I don't know this, I'm only speculating, but it's a nice coincidence at least.
Well, I was going to say, what an incredible culmination of everything, and then have it capped off with Easter services there at Vatican City with all of the cardinals from around the world being there. So,
well, they won't, but you know, I kind of think that the installation would probably happen before that, and then the cardinals would go home to their dioceses, because bishops are expected to be leading Easter celebrations in their own dioceses.
Of course,
you know,
of course, yes.
But I think, well, there'll be plenty of cardinals in Rome anyway, but like, you know, Cardinal Dolan, Cardinal George in Chicago, they would come home for Easter because that's where a bishop belongs on those important days.
Let me take a quick break here, and we'll be right back. Our special guest today is Archbishop John Vlazny from Portland, and I want to talk to him about some of the things that he's been very concerned about. We'll be right back. Our special guest today is Archbishop John Vlazny. He is the Archbishop of Portland, overseeing the diocese there since 1997. He's now in his final days as he has submitted his resignation to Pope Benedict XVI, and will be retiring shortly. And I just want to say, sir, thank you for your service, because you have overseen the diocese through some very difficult days, and I would have to imagine that all the way through even the bankruptcy and everything else that you had to deal with concerning clergy abuse had to be pretty taxing on you personally.
Well, I mean, it was something that I certainly hadn't been looking for, nor did I realize it would be on the agenda during my tenure here. When I came in 1997, my first 2 years were pretty delightful. Everything was humming along nicely, and then, of course, you know, they all have the saying, you know, you want to tell God what your plans are, want to make him laugh, tell him what your plans are. So we obviously had to shift gears and deal with very, very serious issues. But one thing about those difficult days, I must say, I never had a greater sense of unity among the people and the clergy, and a greater feeling of support from the people, because they wanted us to do it right, and I felt that the church came together, as unfortunately people do seem to do best when there's hard times, kind of like our nation. I grew up during World War II, and that was a time of great patriotism, you know, when tough things are happening, people kind of rally around the flag, and so I sensed that even in those difficult years, vocations increased. When I came here, we had 14 seminarians, now we got 41, and the biggest jump occurred during those difficult years. And even financially, even our annual appeal went up during those difficult years. People somehow came through with greater support, and all that helped us. Obviously, we paid the price in terms of a loss of credibility on the part of many. People really struggled with the hardship, the awareness of the gravity of the crimes that have been committed, the inadequacy of dealing with them, what this would mean for them. They didn't know whether this would somehow impact their local parishes, if it would mean a loss. So there were a lot of worries, a lot of concerns, but there were a lot of prayers too, and I always felt it was the power of prayer from a lot of people, including the Carmelite sisters in Eugene and the Trappist monks in Lafayette, people like that praying for the church that sustained us through those days. So, yeah, it was a difficult time, but a grace-filled time too, almost more than any other time.
You know, you have also been pretty vocal on some of the issues of our day, and I too took a very strong stand against Oregon's assisted suicide, but it is law, and to me it was one of the most heart-wrenching things that got passed in this state, and we're still dealing with it. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, obviously I'm puzzled how in our nation this whole issue of respect for human life is not shared as widely as I guess I would have thought 25 years it would be. I wasn't here yet when the physician-assisted suicide law was passed, and I came right after the second round. I don't know if you recall it, but I think it was voted in 1994, and then there was a petition to bring it back to the ballot.
Right.
And I understand it passed the first time 51% to 49%, but the second time, just before I came, it passed again 60% to 40%. So it seemed like Oregonians even strengthened their support of physician-assisted suicide. So it puzzles me. I just, but you know what? We live in a culture which sees no value in suffering, sacrifice. I'm not criticizing when I say that, but it's just kind of true. And so if people don't think there's any value in suffering or living a long life when things are going tough, they see this as an easy way out. And without the light of the gospel, the teachings of Jesus, sometimes some basic truths people never really come to grips with. So, yeah, that's the disappointment. But
you know, you mentioned,
unfortunately, it's spreading in our country.
Yeah, you know, you mentioned the lack of the value of human life. I mean, some of the numbers that we're seeing, even with abortion and assisted suicide, and just the overall value of human life in a whole, it just seems to be at an all-time low. I mean, it seems like there's a spirit of death over the top of us.
Well, that I would say, and I want to be careful how I say this because I feel that way in general, but there actually has been some improvement in terms at least of abortions. We have lowered the number of abortions. I'm not saying there's still a lot, you know, over 1 million every year, but it was at 1.6. I hear it's went down to 1.2 in the last year or two. That's still a lot of abortions, but just the fact that it's not going up anymore. I see a lot of our younger people really re-examining the abortion question. I don't know yet about the physician-assisted suicide issue. I'm not sure where people are.
Well, some of those numbers don't have to be published. I mean, we really don't know what the real
number
is.
We aren't exactly sure of that.
Yeah.
You know, that.
Let me ask you this. As you mentioned, Cardinal Dolan's been very outspoken on the Obama administration's demand through the HHS on Catholic employers that must offer their workers health insurance that covers contraception, just the beginning of this argument. And the Catholic Church, God bless you folks, pushing back the way you are and putting it into the courts. Where do you think this is going?
Well, I hope and pray the court will eventually come to understand that this is definitely a violation of our religious freedom and that we have a right to define ourselves. And that seems to be the core of the issue. I mean, they're kind of telling us that, all right, churches that are places of worship where the people who come are Catholics and the people who provide the services are Catholics, that's a Catholic institution. But a university or a charities organization, you know, a hospital which has more non-Catholic employees and more non-Catholic clients, that's not Catholic. Well, that's not how we never saw ourselves that way. We never ask people when we give them some help through Catholic social services if they're Catholic or not. We help them because they need help. But the government has put itself in this rather strange position saying, well, if you're helping more non-Catholics than you are Catholics, then you're not Catholic yourself. Well, that's bizarre, and no one has ever made that kind of a definition of what a church institution must be. So we feel there's a certain illogical thinking going on. And I mean, obviously, the awkward thing is, and this you may not agree with me, we American bishops have always been in favor of widening health care as broadly as possible, but we want it to be health care. Yeah. And we don't quite see providing abortion services or contraceptive services as health care. Now, obviously, many people would disagree with us on that, but, you know, this is something we have always wanted. We've wanted universal health care, if at all possible. But suddenly when we're being told that these are elements that we must provide if health care is going to be available, we say, wait a minute, we can't do that. That violates our consciences. What
do you think would happen, I mean, if it loses in the court? I mean, let's face it, most of the courts now are heavily slanted to the left, and even if it ends up in the Ninth Circuit, you kind of know where that would go. But what if we lose this? What would the Catholic institutions do?
Well, I'll tell you, it's one reason I'm glad I'll be no longer the Archbishop April 2nd, because this could be a tough moment. I really don't know how we're going to deal with this situation. I mean, other countries have faced this, and we just think some of these services we provide are just so essential to our mission that we can't withdraw from them. I don't know, civil disobedience has occurred before, and it may be a moment when there may be some civil disobedience that could lead to a confrontation that we'd like to avoid, because you have to be true to your own conscience. We in the Catholic Church, we celebrate the feasts of martyrs, people who gave their lives because they were being asked to do things that violated their conscience. They said they wouldn't do it, and so I hope we never get to that kind of a situation. But it happened down in Mexico back 100 years ago when they had the government kind of outlawing religious practice. This isn't quite as dramatic as that, but even a more Christian country than our own came to some kind of a conflict that caused martyrdom on the part of some Catholics who said they just can't go along with what the government's demanding.
It seems this administration is bent on these kinds of issues, not only on the life issues, propagating abortion almost at any level, and now certainly advancing same-sex marriages at a rate that was just overwhelming, and now coming back and throwing these limitations at our Christian conscience and belief. What's your feeling about this? And yet this president's calling himself a Christian.
Well, a lot of people call themselves Christians, and I'm sure he's sincere when he says he's a Christian. He probably embraces Jesus Christ as his Savior, just as I do, as you do. But the problem is you can't just embrace Jesus personally, but you also accept what teachings of Jesus are through his church, and that's, I think, where people tend to make a little distinction. They say, well, I love Jesus, I don't love the church. Well, the church was Jesus' idea.
Yeah.
And in 3 years of public ministry, he couldn't speak out on every particular issue that was going to evolve over the passing of time. So that's why he gave us a church. But I think also part of the problem, we Catholics cause these problems ourselves because we get people in high positions who decide that they need to disagree with the Pope or the bishops. And then I think someone like the president who figures, well, there are the bishops, and then there are some theologians who disagree with the bishops. So I choose to side with those theologians who disagree with the bishops. And they kind of see it as equal authority. And I mean, I'm not trying to put theologians down. Without theologians, I couldn't even exercise my ministry. But, there are individuals who will say to the president, as I'm sure some of the Catholics who are around him in the cabinet say, well, you don't have to worry about that. Not all Catholics agree with the bishops. So he kind of probably thinks he's in a relatively safe position. And I don't know what his thinking is, but I do know a lot of Catholics because of their inability to kind of make distinctions of what are really serious church teachings and what are just, questionable matters. Matters of life and death are pretty significant.
No question about it. All right, my last question, because I know I want to value your time here.
Oh, yeah. I just looked at my watch.
Okay, last question. What do you think are the challenges ahead for the new Pope?
Oh, the secularism that pervades not only the countries in Europe, but now is becoming a very clear and real threat to religious practice in our country. It's not only that there are people around who, have no time for God or for church services and things like that, but there's a certain feeling in the air that churches are a problem. And religious practice is something that leads people astray. And the secular culture has some spokespersons that really want to marginalize the church at best or destroy it at worst. And I think that when you see countries like Spain and France, which were such Christian Catholic nations, with church worship down to 5%, we aren't that bad here yet. That's a real challenge, how to bring the Catholic people back to strengthen the church so that the secularists don't have such an influence as they presently do in the media, in the world of academia, in the entertainment industry. And those are the ways people hear the message. And when the gospel is neglected or ridiculed in those three media, wow, it's pretty tough for our young people to hear the message of the church. So I'd say dealing with secularism and developing means where the church can communicate more directly to her people and not simply through the media and the world of academia and the entertainment industry. So I think a lot of the thinking people have about the church is reflected from what they see or hear in those fora, and that's why I think Pope Benedict XVI better start tweeting. He's got to have some direct communication. Young people are all over the place. My successor, he's very much into all that high-tech stuff, which I'm not as good at, and that's great because we bishops, we teachers of the faith, have to communicate as directly as we can with our people, because I think we're being misrepresented and misunderstood, because unfortunately there are those who'd like to see us misunderstood.
Yeah, well, Archbishop Vlazny, thank you for your time. I know you're on a tight schedule. Thank you for your service, and I think you've given us a good insight as to the days ahead, at least over the next month or so, for the Catholic Church as they select a new Pope. Blessings to you,
and
my
I'll be
friend.
down to Southern Oregon for a couple more visits before it's all over anyway. And I'll come back when I'm the retired Archbishop. A lot of friends down there, so.
Good. All right, let us know when you're down here. Maybe we'll have you live in the studio.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.